fourth area of research was around sustainable construction. And I'm fascinated by this one because it's not an area that traditionally people think about much. But when you look at Africa, by the end of the century, is predicted to have the largest cities ever built in human history. And I mean, that's something quite crazy to think about. If you look at the big Chinese cities, you look at the big European cities of the past, we're talking about places like Lagos being 95 million people in a city. You know, that's kind of like some African countries, you know, that's 2 or 3 times the population of a medium-sized African country just in one city. And if you think about it now, where Lagos is largely informal and lots of slums and informal settlements, if you think about that at that sort of scale, it's absolutely frightening. But if we could sit down and say, what would a life-giving African city look like? You know, those cities could be things of great beauty and cities which really bring innovation and excitement, because most cultures in the past have emerged in urban areas, and new ideas emerge in urban areas as cities grow and people come together and work together. But I think when we look at things like climate, the construction of cities is often one of the places where the most emissions happen. And so we've got to be able to build these cities in a way that's good for people and the environment. So I'm fascinated by this area, and I'd love to hear from you, Qobo. What are the key findings as you looked at sustainable construction? Where could things be going in the future as we start to build these massive and hopefully magnificent cities of the future?
As you've pointed out, we got to recognize that by 2050, more than 70% of the world's population will be concentrated in cities. And as you say, in Africa, we're going to have some of the biggest cities in the world. Now, buildings alone are responsible for between 25 and 40% of global energy use and 30 to 40% of global greenhouse gases. This is quite significant. This is major. You know, and while the construction sector and related activities are also the main contributors of local and regional air pollutants such as carbon monoxide, lead, sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxide. And so it's very important to pay attention to the, you know, the greening of the construction sector or the built environment, including, you know, the building of environmentally friendly buildings and the utilization of environmentally friendly material. And in this particular instance, we are zeroing in on the use of recyclables as building material, because sustainable construction is a broad field. So we're just zeroing in on the use of recyclables. And why recyclables? Because as we've pointed out, that 70 to 80% of the waste in Africa is recyclable. And it can be turned into these building materials, such as bricks, you know, tiles, paving materials, fencing poles, even industrial equipment, household items like bathtubs, sinks, tables, chairs can all be made from the recycled material. And so we went out and we looked for organizations, companies that are involved in recycling. And we found quite a range of products were being generated for the sustainable construction industry from recyclables. So for instance, Ecobricks in Uganda was producing these beautiful, pavers made from, recycled plastics, hard plastics. They were also making fencing poles. Now, fencing poles is an interesting one because remember that traditionally fencing poles are either made from wood, which involves cutting down trees, or they are made from, metal, which is normally steel. which again involves extraction. So the use of these fencing poles, which we have seen from different entities, there's a group in Mombasa that was making fencing poles from the recycled plastics, the same as we saw with Ecobricks in Uganda. They were making fencing poles from recycled plastics. So that means that there will be less trees that need to be cut in order to have fencing done around Africa if we were to use these recycled materials for this construction. It's the same with the bricks and the pavers. They tend to be more durable. They tend to be stronger. They tend to last longer than your traditional cement-based or sand-based products. So there's a huge advantage there that we also saw with use of recyclables in the sustainable construction sector.
And you mentioned the word beautiful, and that's obviously not something that people often associate with plastic and with recycling. So these are obviously functional, as you've been saying. They're strong and you can make them in the kind of shapes and sizes. But are they also something that speaks to the higher senses? That it's a product that you'd want to put in your house when your mother-in-law comes to visit, because rather than sort of Italian tiles or something else, which right now we will put a cultural sort of premium on.
So I'm going to give an example of a small operation. It's a company in Zimbabwe called the Noble Savage, and they do tiles, to do these amazing, beautiful tiles that would rival any of the ceramic tiles or porcelain tiles that you have out there in the industry, and they are oversubscribed. They are struggling to satisfy the market because the market wants those products, not just because of the environmental concerns, but because they're functional, they're beautiful, they're great aesthetics. But the big cherry on the cake is they're environmentally sustainable. So there's a huge demand. That's the same we heard everywhere. In Kenya with the Genja makers who make these bricks, they can't satisfy the demand. That's the same we heard with Ecobricks with their fencing poles in Uganda. They cannot satisfy the demand because these are items that are highly functional, but they are also, they compete with any of the traditional unsustainable products that we've had out there.
So what would the drivers be for this industry to grow and for jobs to be created? A lot more jobs to be created. You obviously we're seeing some small companies emerge, but if we're going to build cities large enough for 95 million people in Lagos or equally in other spots, obviously a lot more jobs need to be created. How can that be driven forward?
It's important to organize the recycling. It goes back to the importance of behavioral change towards waste management in African cities and the promotion of recycling for recycling-based sustainable construction products to become widely and broadly available. There has to be a huge amount of recycling, which is done. So instead of burning waste and throwing it in landfills and rivers and so on, the waste in Africa needs to be recycled. That's the starting point. And there has to be a promotion of a sustainable construction industry. That's at a policy level now. Can we create special economic zones for the sustainable construction industry? Can we create business parks with incentives for the sustainable construction industry? One of the things we learned from the companies that are involved in this, because these are mostly young people, by the way, and the surprising thing is we found it was mostly women who are driving the sustainable construction industry. So that was really fascinating. Now, the biggest challenge they are facing is in in getting the factory equipment that can produce the quantities to the quality that they need in order to bring a greater quantity of product into the market. And so there is need for industrial parks, science parks that complement this industry in the fabrication, in the production of equipment, in the production of technologies that help the production of sustainable construction products. So business parks, special economic zones, the policy level, that's something that can be promoted. But also the financing. We can never run away from the fact that you do need a fair amount of money to be able to set up a sustainable construction products factory. With the Jenga makers in Nairobi, for example, they had to borrow money from their parents because they're a group of, I think it's over 20 young people that came together, and they had to borrow money from their parents in order to start this operation. The Noble Savage in Zimbabwe, that is the same thing. They had to start from contributions of $100 each to set up this operation. So some startup funding for the sector is going to be important for this sector to really grow to that level where it has an impact in provisional products.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. And I think you speak strongly on the promotion of the sustainable construction industries. And I've noted very interesting drivers for this particular industry. But in your view, what could be the role of stakeholders such as the church in the promotion of this, sustainable construction?
So the church has a key role as an information dissemination platform. It will help with creation of awareness. We've got this product. We have sustainable bricks, tiles, fencing poles. Does the ordinary man know about it? How can we publicize these things? And the church is a strong platform for publicity of these sustainable products and sustainable industries. But also the church is going to be key in promotion of recycling and in that behavioral change. So people stop, dumping waste. People stop, littering, and they make use of receptacles and recycling stations in order to drive recycling. And the church can set up, recycling points where these companies can come and buy the products, buy the recyclables from these recycling stations. And so you're beginning to promote that culture of recycling, which is required for sustainable construction to be successful in Africa. And the church itself, a lot of churches are building. How great would it be if the church, in terms of their own buildings, start embracing these products? That becomes a very real and tangible demonstration of your, belief in the need for sustainable construction.
It's interesting how you give an example of, churches leading by examples, by using, recycled materials for their construction, which is quite fascinating. I would like to hear from you. You've talked strongly about policies, about finances, about the role of communities, etc. And Miles gave us quite interesting stats about, how the cities are going to grow in the future in the continent of Africa, and that's likely to be a scenario in the next 30, 50, and 100 years. What were your main takeaways from this particular interesting research? What do you take home from this expedition from different countries?
So there are three things that I will mention as key takeaways. The first thing is to these case studies that we looked at should be used as pilots. We should identify pilots that we can use in order to, create modules that can be replicated across Africa. So in that way, we are now really promoting large-scale sustainable construction. And we are also creating sustainable jobs for the young people. So we need to create these pilots that help us create modules and models for replication that provide training and operational, training in operations, training in business, and creating of social enterprise models that can be used for replication across Africa. So it's key that we identify from the case studies which sites we would like to use as these pilots. Secondly, creating platforms that promote this. Like I said, most of the entities we looked at are actually youth startups. These are youth companies that have been set up in sustainable construction. How can we create a platform that will help to popularize, to grow, to provide support, peer learning, exchange of ideas among the practitioners in that space, so that it becomes something that we're promoting across Africa, and we're creating these social enterprise vehicles across Africa that promote sustainable construction. And then finally, the issue of policy. How can we lobby the governments of Africa to make available facilities, as you say, special economic zones, industrial parks, finance for sustainable construction startups and for scaling up, and how can we create policies that are going to promote the growth of this industry? That's going to be a key takeaway in promoting sustainable construction. So those are the three things that I have in mind, which I think in terms of policy, in terms of pilots, and creating platforms for the promotion of sustainable construction across Africa.
Thank you, Joseph. That's really exciting. And I was lucky enough a few years ago to travel through Portugal, and I remember looking at the clay tiles that they put on all of their homes, and there was a certain point of their history where they kind of invented this technology, and it was absolutely, they had to do it. Their city had been destroyed by a flood. They were building, and they had to find a way to build in a quick way, but also in a beautiful way. And several hundred years later, their cities are defined by these beautiful tiles. And it seems like this is maybe a moment where in Africa we're also defining how we're going to build our cities. What are the technologies that we're going to be using? What are the art forms that we're going to be using? And it's going to shape what our cities look like for hundreds of years to come. So it's exciting to kind of see this conversation start, particularly those platforms that you're talking about, where young people can start to say, this is how we want to build, and actually then start those pilots to make it real. Because our grandchildren's grandchildren are going to be living with the decisions we make as we build our cities now, aren't they? Cities last for a very long time. And so this is a very exciting conversation to be had. I hope we make the right decisions in that process. For those who are interested in this conversation, we will be getting together and talking more about it. We want to hear your voices as we engage on these issues and take this research to publication and to practice. And so please join us at our workshop. The details of the workshop will be attached to this video. We would love to see you there and part of this conversation going forward. So thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Fred.